The day my father was buried, my sister smiled at me across the grave and said, "Don't get too comfortable. You were always the mistake this family had to tolerate." I held my tears. I held my breath. I held every single thing I wanted to say. But I want you to stay with me, because what happened next, what I uncovered, what I built, and what came crashing down on every single person who laughed at me that day is the kind of story you don't forget. If you've ever been made to feel invisible by the people who were supposed to love you most, this one is for you. Let's start from the beginning. My name is Claire. Claire Whitmore. And for 31 years, I believed I was the lucky one. I believed that being adopted by the Whitmore family, one of the most respected families in Hartford, Connecticut, was the greatest gift life had ever handed me. My father, Gerald Whitmore, was a civil engineer who had built a mid-sized construction firm from nothing. He was soft-spoken, dignified, and the kind of man who could fill a room with calm just by walking into it. He was also the man who flew to South Korea when I was 4 months old, carried me off a plane wrapped in a yellow blanket, and told my biological story to no one unless he chose to. He always chose to tell it with pride. He used to say, "Claire came to us because she was meant to." The universe doesn't make mistakes. I believed him. For a long time, I truly believed him. My mother, Sandra, was warmer in the early years. She baked on Sunday mornings, remembered every teacher's name, and once drove 3 hours in a snowstorm because I'd left my science fair project at a hotel. But Sandra had a weakness that I only understood much later. She could not say no to my older sister, Rebecca. Rebecca Whitmore was everything I was not: biological, blonde, loud, and absolutely certain that the world owed her something. She was 5 years older than me, and from the very first memory I have of her, she treated me like a guest who had overstayed their welcome, not with screaming, not at first. It was quieter than that. She'd forget to invite me to birthday parties with her friends. She'd refer to me in third person when I was standing right there. She once told a cousin at Thanksgiving that I was basically the family's charity case, and then smiled at me when I flinched, like she was waiting to see what I'd do. I never did anything. Because my father was always there, and when Dad was in the room, Rebecca behaved. He was the force field between us. I didn't know what it would feel like when that force field disappeared. I found out on a Tuesday in March. My father had been battling pancreatic cancer for 14 months. He'd fought it the way he'd built his business, quietly, methodically, without drama. But on that Tuesday, the hospital called, and by the time I drove through morning traffic to get there, he was already gone. I sat beside him for an hour before I could make myself leave the room. I held his hand, which was already cooling, and I talked to him. I told him I was grateful. I told him he'd given me everything. I did not cry until I got to my car, and then I cried so hard I couldn't see the steering wheel for a full 10 minutes. The funeral was 5 days later. And that was when everything changed. There were maybe 200 people there. My father had touched a lot of lives. Old employees, city council members, neighbors who'd known him for 40 years. I sat in the front row beside my mother and Rebecca, wearing a black dress I'd bought the night before because I hadn't been able to think clearly enough to plan ahead. I kept looking at the casket and thinking, he's the only person in this room who ever fully saw me. And now he's gone. After the service, as people gathered at the house for the reception, Rebecca pulled me into the hallway near the guest bathroom, out of earshot from everyone, and handed me a sealed envelope. "Dad left something for everyone," she said, and her voice was smooth and rehearsed. "This is yours." I opened it. It was a check. $10,000 made out in my name, drawn from the estate account. I looked up at her. I said, "What is this?" She smiled. Not a kind smile. A performance of a smile, and said, "That's your share, Claire. Dad left the business and the property to Mom and me, which honestly makes sense. You know," she paused, let it hang. Then she said it, "You were never really family." And she walked back into the living room to accept condolences like a grieving daughter. I stood there in that hallway for a very long time. I want to be honest with you because honesty is the only thing I have left to offer in this story. In that moment, I did not feel rage. I felt something worse than rage. I felt confirmation. Like every whisper, every sideways glance, every charity case, comment, every moment of being half included and half excluded had been building toward this exact sentence. You were never really family. My father's body was barely cold. And his daughter, the biological one, the real one, was standing in his house telling me that his love for me had been a formality. I drove home. I sat in my apartment, a 2-bedroom in Hartford that I'd paid for myself with my salary as a junior financial analyst. And I put the check on my kitchen table and stared at it. $10,000. That was what 31 years of love and devotion translated to, according to Rebecca. I didn't cash it. I couldn't. It felt like accepting the verdict. For 3 weeks, I barely functioned. I went to work because work required a body in a chair, and I put my body in a chair. I answered emails. I ran numbers. I said good morning to people in the hallway and smiled when smiling was expected of me. But inside, I was somewhere very dark and very quiet. I called my father's cell phone twice, just to hear his voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I just needed to hear his voice say his name. The turning point came from a file cabinet. My father, being the organized man he was, had always kept copies of important documents in a locked file cabinet in his home office. After he passed, I'd been asked by my mother, not Rebecca, to help sort through some paperwork. My mother was overwhelmed and didn't know where anything was. Rebecca had other things to handle, which apparently meant coordinating with the estate attorney without telling me the appointment times. But I still had a key to my father's house. He'd given it to me years ago and never asked for it back. So one afternoon I let myself in. My mother was at a neighbor's. The house was quiet. I went to his office and I opened the file cabinet. I was looking for insurance documents. What I found instead was a folder labeled in my father's handwriting, Claire Personal. Inside was a letter. Not a legal document, a letter. Handwritten on his personal stationery, dated 8 months before his death. It started, "My dearest Claire, if you are reading this, then things did not go as I planned, and I am sorry for the confusion that may have followed." I sat down on the floor of his office and read every word. My father had written a formal amendment to his will 14 months ago, when he was first diagnosed. In that amendment, he had left me a 1/3 share of Whitmore Construction, equal to Rebecca's share. The remaining third went to my mother. He had done this deliberately, thoughtfully, and with full legal counsel. He had also written a note to the estate attorney, which was paper-clipped to the letter, instructing that all 3 beneficiaries be contacted simultaneously and that no one be given documentation before the others. At the bottom of the letter, my father had written, "I know Rebecca. I know your mother. I am leaving this with you because I believe that if there is any confusion about your place in this family, this letter and the documents attached will make my intentions clear. You are not a charity case, my love. You are my daughter. I chose you every single day. And I chose you in this too." I sat on that floor for a very long time. Then I made some calls. The estate attorney's name was Martin Holloway, and he had a corner office on Farmington Avenue. When I walked in the next morning without an appointment, his assistant tried to stop me. I handed her my father's letter and said, "Please give this to Mr. Holloway and tell him Claire Whitmore is here." I was seen within 8 minutes. Martin Holloway was a man in his mid-60s with a silver beard and the practiced calm of someone who had seen every variety of family dysfunction. When I explained what had happened, the envelope, Rebecca's speech in the hallway, the absence of any notification from his office, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Miss Whitmore, I sent certified letters to all 3 beneficiaries the morning after your father passed. I received confirmation of delivery on all 3. He pulled up his records. Rebecca had signed for all 3 letters. Her signature was on all 3 receipts. She had intercepted my notification. She had opened correspondence addressed to me, removed my copy of the will amendment, and replaced it with a personal check drawn from estate funds she did not have sole authority to distribute, in an attempt to buy my silence and secure the entire business for herself." Martin Holloway's expression when he realized what he was looking at was something I will carry with me for the rest of my life.
He said quietly but very clearly, "Miss Whitmore, this is a serious legal matter." I said, "I know."
That's why I'm here. What followed was not a dramatic confrontation. It was something more satisfying than that. It was process. Martin Holloway filed a formal notice with the probate court. My father's amended will, which was fully executed and witnessed, was entered into evidence. Rebecca's interception of legal mail, federal mail, was documented. The unauthorized check she had issued me from estate funds she did not control was flagged as a potential breach of fiduciary duty. My attorney, a woman named Patricia Osei, who I found through a colleague and who turned out to be absolutely formidable, filed a petition to have Rebecca removed as the primary executor of the estate, citing her documented interference with the legal process and her misrepresentation to a beneficiary. Rebecca hired her own attorney, of course. She called me twice during this period. The first call was angry. She told me I was being ungrateful and dramatic and that Dad would be so disappointed. The second call was different. She cried. She said she was scared. She said she didn't know what she was thinking. She said she needed me to drop the petition because it was tearing the family apart. I listened to her cry. And then I said very calmly, "Rebecca, you handed me a fake inheritance check at Dad's funeral and told me I was never really family. You intercepted my legal mail. You forged my signature, or as good as, on those receipts. You tried to steal what my father specifically chose to leave me. And you did it the day we buried him." Pause. "I'll see you in court." The probate hearing was not glamorous. Courts rarely are, but it was decisive. The judge reviewed the documentation, reviewed the certified mail receipts, reviewed the estate account records showing the unauthorized check, and upheld my father's amended will in its entirety. I received my 1/3 share of Whitmore Construction. Rebecca was removed as executor and replaced by a neutral third party appointed by the court. She was also required to reimburse the estate for the $10,000 check she had issued without authority. Her attorney had advised her to settle quietly. She had refused. That was her last bad decision in this chapter. The day the ruling came down, I drove to my father's grave. It was a Thursday in early July. The cemetery was almost empty. I sat beside his headstone for a while, just being there. I told him what happened. I told him his letter had saved everything. I told him that his handwriting, his careful architectural handwriting on that cream stationery, had been more powerful than anything Rebecca had thrown at me. I said, "You chose me every single day, Dad. I know that now." The summer wind moved through the trees overhead. I chose to believe he heard me. Life after the ruling was quieter than I expected. My mother, to her credit, did not take Rebecca's side once the full picture became clear. She called me the evening after the hearing and cried, genuinely cried, and said, "I didn't know, Claire. I want you to know I didn't know." I believe her. I believe she was also, in her own way, a woman who had spent decades managing Rebecca rather than confronting her. We are still rebuilding. It is slow, but it is real. Rebecca and I do not speak. That is not punishment. That is just the natural result of who she revealed herself to be. You cannot hand someone a fake check at their father's funeral, tell them they were never family, steal their inheritance, and then expect a relationship to continue. Some bridges don't burn. They were never built to begin with. I hold no active anger toward her. Mostly I feel something closer to clarity. As for the business, I am now a 1/3 owner of Whitmore Construction. I still work as a financial analyst. I like my job. I'm good at it, but I attend board meetings quarterly, and I have hired a firm to conduct a full audit of the company's accounts. My father built something real. I intend to make sure it continues to reflect him. Here is what I want to leave you with. My father used to say that the most important things are rarely the loudest things. He built a company without ever raising his voice. He raised a daughter without ever making her feel like a burden. And when he knew he was dying, he sat down and wrote me a letter by hand, not an email, not a voicemail, a letter with a pen on his good stationery. Because he knew that some things need to exist on paper. Some things need to be held. Rebecca had 31 years to make me feel welcome. She chose instead to make me feel small. My father had 31 years to take back the choice he made in that South Korean hospital. He chose instead to sign his name on an amendment and leave me 1/3 of everything he built. I was always family. And when it mattered most, the law agreed. If someone in your life is trying to convince you that you don't belong, that you are less than, that you are a charity case, that your love and your loyalty are worth less than theirs, I need you to hear this. The people who try hardest to erase you are usually the ones who are most afraid of what you're worth. Don't let them write your story. Pick up your own pen. And if you've ever felt like Claire Whitmore felt in that hallway, holding a check that was meant to silence you. Just remember, karma doesn't always arrive in a hurricane. Sometimes it walks in wearing a three-piece suit, carrying a court order, and it is absolutely perfectly on time.